Hey there guys, a while ago I made a video for the best warrior and engineer builds for PvE, PvP and world vs world. The Necromancer was also requested as a profession that you guys wanted another video on. So here it is, the best meta builds in a video for the Necromancer. I'm going to cover various meta builds for endgame PvE, open world PvE, PvP and world vs world. The builds I discuss in this video have been present in the meta for a long time. If you watch this video in the future, you can safely use these builds. However, make sure to check out the websites that I have linked in the video description for the most up-to-date version of that particular build. These websites like Snow Crows, Meta Battle, Discreticize and Gods of PvP are maintained by experienced players and provide the best builds for the current meta. And since you have build templates now, I will also link these in the video description or in the comments. And to please the YouTube algorithm, make sure to watch this video all the way to the end and give this video a like. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already and share this video with your guildies. Okay, let's get into the video and start with endgame PvE builds for the Necromancer. In endgame PvE content, the Necromancer has somewhat of a niche role, meaning that it can excel in specific situations, but it is not commonly used in most team compositions. Don't be discouraged, most teams have a spot for the Necromancer in their team. I want to start off with the most popular and advised build for the Necromancer, the Heal Scourge. You wouldn't expect the Necromancer to be a healer, but is actually quite good in doing so. It can be used at most raid encounters. Using the Scourge Elite specialization from the Path of Fire expansion, the Necromancer can easily shield allies in a raid or fractal with barriers. The barriers, the yellow health bar you get from a Scourge skill, are helpful when a big attack from a raid boss is coming in. These barriers are generated by the sand shades that the Scourge uses. Desert Shroud and Sand Cascade are two great examples of Sandshade skills that grant barrier to your allies while also slightly damaging your enemies. This Scourge build uses a combination of Marshals and Shaman's gear. This gear increases the healing output while also adding some extra condition damage. The gear is easy to get and isn't too expensive, so this build is great if you don't have too much money on you. The traits of this build are the most interesting, using a combination of blood magic to heal, soul reaping to get more life force to use your skills, and the Scourge for the sand shades and the barriers. The Heal Scourge excels in keeping your team alive and even prevent them from taking fatal damage using the barriers. A thing I love about the blood magic trait line is that you can pull multiple downed players towards you using the transfusion trait. So if we use the Garish Pillar Sandshade skill, it will pull up to 5 downed players towards you, which allows the Necromancer and your team to rest them when they get out of position. While you rest them, the Ritual of Life trait creates a well of blood at your position, which further heals your allies that just got up and keeps you alive while resting your allies. The Soul Battery trait makes sure those allies don't bleed out if they are near you. This makes a Necromancer the best profession in a raid encounter to res your allies. This also makes the Necromancer great if you are a more experienced player and you are playing with less experienced players which often die a lot. Since most of the functionalities that I just discussed are from the Blood Magic trait line, you can also use these functionalities while you are playing a base Necromancer or a Reaper. The last great thing about this build, before we move on to the next one, is that it requires no rotation. You have to prioritize 4 to 5 skills, but that's about it. You won't have to practice on the DPS column for hours to understand and get into it. However, before you rush into raids, keep in mind that this is a healing build. Most healing or support roles require good knowledge of a raid encounter. So if you are new to raiding, it might be good to play another profession or another Necromancer build first before you start with this one. Alright, let's move on to the next build, a power DPS build for the Reaper. For this build, the Necromancer uses the Reaper trait line, the Necromancer Elite specialization from Heart of Thorns. This Reaper build can put out a substantial amount of AoE damage and vulnerability. The vulnerability makes sure that your enemies take extra damage while you damage them. However, the AoE damage that the Reaper build does makes this build a bit mediocre in most raid setups. Most raid encounters don't really spawn adds except for a couple. The strong AoE damage that this build does is therefore not to your advantage in a raid encounter. It is better to use a build or profession that has more focused single target damage. On the other hand, this makes this build quite reliable in Fractals where you have a lot of mobs and adds that the Reaper can damage. The vulnerability that the Reaper applies makes it easier for the rest of your party to clear through a Fractal. The build mainly focuses on dealing damage while you are in the Reaper Shroud. A lot of your main damage actually comes from your first skill. You can do a substantial amount of damage by just pressing 1 actually. This also makes the build build a bit more beginner friendly. You can focus on what is happening in the fight instead of focusing on your abilities and your rotation. The Spite trait line also provides you with more might if you are using Shroud skill 1. This makes auto attacking a bit more tempting. Although the build is sometimes seen in raids, I personally think that this build excels in Fractals. I think this is a great build if you want to get into endgame content. If you plan to raid more often, you can use this build as well. However, if you want to get more serious about it, I would advise you to change your build to something more substantial or even another profession. Moving on to the last endgame PvE build, a condition-based Scourge. Another relatively easy build according to the Snowcrows and meta battle. The build is okay for most raid encounters, however it struggles with the same issues as the Power Reaper. It works at most raid encounters, but it excels when there are more enemies around. A great thing about this build is that it doesn't really have a rotation in which order you must use your skills. It does have a prioritization of skills though. You cannot simply mash your fist on your keyboard and expect it to go well. For example, you can use Feast of Corruption to keep your life force up and Harrowing Wave to apply Torment and Burning. You need to keep your life force up as much as possible and spend it on your Sandshade skills. This way you can apply conditions to your enemies while also slightly protecting your allies with barrier. Using the Epidemic skill, you can easily spread conditions that your squad has applied to other enemies. Sabbatha in the Spirit Veil is a great boss to use this build on. Sabbatha spawns a lot of other bandits where you can easily spread the conditions to. I also think that this build works very well on the Veil Guardian, Slothazor if you use it with caution, and Desmina. At Desmina this build excels since you are responsible for killing the tormented dead with your conditions and Epidemic. Although the build is fairly easy, I wouldn't use this build if you just started out raiding. You can easily mess up by, for example, killing your own allied sloth at Slothazor or messing up the tormented dead at Desmina. Like the Power Reaper, I think this build can excel in Fractals. I think this build shines in areas where you can spread a huge amount of AoE Condi damage. Fractals would be perfect for that. Okay, these were 3 meta endgame builds for the Necromancer. These have been around for a while and I'm sure they will be for some time. The 3 builds were mostly seen in raids, but the Power Reaper and the Condi Necromancer are really good in Fractals as well. I'm sure that I have seen Healing Scourges as well in Fractals of the Mists. Since the Healing Scourge and the Condition Scourge don't really have a rotation, I want to cover the rotation of the Power Reaper. It is fairly easy to understand, but it requires some explanation. Okay, summon your minions and start with your axe and Warhorn. Then use the Well of Suffering on the location of the raid boss or a group of enemies, and then quickly swap to cancel the animation and aftercast. Then use Nightfall and Grasping Darkness on your greatsword. You should have enough life force now to enter Reaper Shroud and get the damage fiesta started. Use Soul Spiral, skill 4, to apply some conditions to your foe and get some extra damage in. Now you want to use your auto attack chain about 8 times until your Reaper Shroud runs out. Now you are back in Greatsword. Use Gravedigger and Death Spiral, skill 2 and 3, and finish with an auto attack chain. Do this until skill 4 and 5 are back up. Use skill 4 and 5, weapon swap to axe, and use Ghastly Claws, skill 2 on the axe. This will give you some extra life force before the whole thing starts over. Use Well of Suffering and enter Reaper Shroud once again. When your foe gets below 50% health, the rotation changes slightly. When you are on your greatsword and out of Reaper Shroud, you want to spam Gravedigger in combination with Nightfall and Grasping Darkness. Gravedigger will almost be an instant cast if your target gets below 50%. It is way stronger than just auto attacking. I will also link a video as an info chart of someone who executes this rotation perfectly. Refer to the Snowcrows website for a written and an even more detailed description of the rotation I've just discussed. Alright, that were the endgame PvE builds for the Necromancer. Now, let's move on to open world PvE builds. Before I want to move on to the first build, I would like to mention that the Power Reaper and the Condi Scourge I just discussed are also very useful in open world PvE. Both builds really shine in meta events or at a big group of enemies. On a number of occasions I ran a Condi Scourge build when I was doing multiple meta events with my guild. Anyway, that's good to know. Let's move on to the first build. A Minion Master build that uses the Reaper Elite specialization. If you want to experience a true Warlock feeling of controlling and using minions, then this build is for you. Your main weapon for this build is the Greatsword. A weapon that can do a great amount of damage for the Reaper, especially skills like Nightfall and Soul Spiral as we have seen in the endgame PvE rotation. Your second weapon set consists out of an axe and a Warhorn. You will use your axe to generate some extra life force and remove boons from enemies. The Warhorn is great for breaking break bars and providing you with some swiftness in combat. You want to get as much life force as you can get since the Reaper Shroud is so incredibly strong. The last trait in the Reaper trait line makes sure that you get a ton of ferocity along with quickness, so you will be able to deal damage much faster. That's nice and all, but we are here for the minions. Well, this build uses your standard Necromancer minions like the Flesh Golem, Shadow Fiend, Bone Fiend and the Blood Fiend. The reason you want to use a Reaper for this build is the Shout skill Rise. This Shout skill will slightly damage your enemies, but will also summon a Shambling Horror for each enemy hit with a maximum of 5 targets. So you can more than double your current minions with just one skill. When these Shambling Horrors attack, they will absorb the damage you take. Make sure to use the skill when you are fighting a number of enemies so you reduce the damage you take and get the maximum benefits from the Rise skill. The more minions you have, the more tankier and beefier you will be. The Death Magic trait line allows you to take more damage with the Armored Shroud trait. This trait will increase your toughness for each minion you have, so having more minions will reduce your damage taken. However, you must keep in mind that a higher toughness means that you are generating more threat to enemies. This means that enemies are more likely to attack you. For free-to-play players out there, you are in luck. This build is also really useful for you guys out there. Instead of the Reaper trait line, we will use the Blood Magic trait line to keep yourself and allies alive. This trait line allows you and your allies to get some life-stealing benefits. Instead of a greatsword, you can use a dagger and a focus as a great alternative. And instead of the Rise Shout skill, you can use the Summon Bone Minion skill. This build does less damage than the Reaper variant. But when I first made a Necromancer in 2012, I used to play a similar build to this one and I really enjoyed to play it. Back then, it was one of my favorite builds to play. Now, I want to move on to the next build that uses a staff in open world PvE. The staff is one of my favorite weapons for the Necromancer and I still use it a lot to this day. The reason I love it so much is that it can be used to quickly deal AoE damage. Also, it can provide you with regeneration and apply and transfer conditions to foes. An amazing weapon for the Necromancer if you ask me. In terms of functionality, the build is similar to the builds we have discussed before. You can support your allies and grant them lifesteal with the Blood Magic trait line. Also, you will use minions to deal damage along with your Sandshades and Scepter skills for AoE damage. When I'm doing open world content on my Necromancer, I usually go for this build or a very similar one. There, we mostly discussed open world builds that are focused on dealing damage with minions. For you guys out there that are not very fond of minions, I got a build for you too. This one is another Scourge build and it is once again focused on dealing condition damage. This build is also pretty straightforward. You can use your Sandshade to do damage in combination with your Scepter, Torch and Offhand Dagger. The build uses a Soul Reaping trait line to increase your life force and deal more damage with your Sandshade. The Curses trait line increases your critical strike chance, but it also increases your sustainability with the Parasitic Contagion trait. This trait will heal you for a percentage of the condition damage you do. Since this is a condition based build, you should be able to survive with just this trait. Last, we have the Scourge trait line that provides you with the Sandshades. The Sandshades will be reduced to a single Sandshade because of the Sand 7 trait. Your single Sandshade will deal more damage and your Sandshade skills will have a wider range. Now, that were my favorite open world PvE meta builds. Next up, Necromancer World vs World builds. If you have seen my favorite warrior meta builds video, you might remember that the boon removal is very strong in World vs World. The Necromancer excels in removing boons, so I want to start off with a build that does exactly that. This Scourge build focuses on doing a considerable amount of power DPS with a Scepter Dagger and an Axe Focus combination. You can swap out the Axe Focus for a staff. As I have stated before, I love the staff as a weapon for the Necromancer. This is not just a personal preference, but I'm certain that the staff works great for this build. You can easily deal damage to your enemies further away since the staff skills have a longer range than the Scepter skills. If you decide to use a staff, make sure to take the Soul Marks trait so your marks become unblockable. Next to that, the build also has some support abilities. Since you are running a Scourge build, the Necromancer can summon Sandshades, which can both damage and support your allies. This build also uses the Sand 7 trait, which makes sure you can only summon one strong Sandshade instead of 3 weaker ones. An interesting feature is that if you use your Sandshade and then use a Sandshade skill, this effect will happen near the Sandshade itself. However, if you have no Sandshade active and use a Sandshade skill, this effect will happen near you. Depending on your playstyle and the playstyle of your Zerg or squad, you might want to adapt to this. For example, if you move closely together as a blob and fight your enemies in melee range, you may not want to use a Sandshade at all. You want to buff allies and damage enemies near you. If you are fighting a group of enemies from a longer distance, you might want to use a Sandshade. You can then apply conditions to enemies and buff your allies that are fighting in melee range. But really, the main functionality of this build is yet to come. The Necromancer, not just the Scourge, has access to 2 great wells that can do severe damage to enemies. The Well of Suffering, which applies vulnerability to enemies, and the Well of Corruption, which rips boons from enemies, are the core of this build. Using the Well of Corruption to rip boons and the Well of Suffering to let your allies deal a ton of damage, you can easily dislocate an enemy team or Zerg. They will be rushing in, all confident, with stability and other boons, and then there is a Scourge to take that all away. This tactic works similar to the Warrior's Winds of Disenchantment skill, which I discussed in another video. To conclude this build and discuss more boon ripping skills, your healing skill, Sand Flare, will convert enemy boons while also healing yourself and providing barrier to yourself and allies. The range of this, however, is fairly short. Trail of Anguish will give you stability and swiftness. It is great to use to quickly get in or out of a fight. Next to that, the skill will also break stun, so it is easier for you to get away. This is something you really need in World vs World, and of course, touching the trail that this skill leaves behind will corrupt a boon if an enemy touches it. You mainly want to use this skill to break your stun and stay alive. Swiftness and stability will usually be applied by a guardian that is in your team. Your elite skill, Ghastly Breach, will further rip boons and provide boons. This skill cannot be used to target enemies that are further away. It will drop directly on your location, and the range is also fairly small, but the skill itself is really strong. It is best to use the skill in the middle of a fight, preferably when there are a huge number of players moving in and out of that area where you drop the Ghastly Breach. This way, you can keep ripping boons and apply conditions. Since this skill also applies cripple, it is easier to pick off players affected by this, since they won't be able to catch up with their group or Zerg. This build was mainly focused on doing power DPS with Berserker gear. This build also has a variant in which you will use Celestial gear for a more hybrid and defensive playstyle. The next build I want to discuss is the Support Scourge. I want to discuss this build briefly since most of the functionalities of the Sandshades and the Necromancer have been explained, and in the Support Scourge build in the endgame PvE section. With this build, you can use your Sandshade to support allies from a distance or use no Sandshade to support your allies near you. An interesting feature about this build is that even without your Sandshade, a number of skills will trigger blood magic traits that can heal your allies. For example, Garish Pillar will trigger Transfusion, which will teleport downed allies to your location. This way, you can get them away from the fray and get them back up. Also, the Life from Death trait, which is triggered by the Death Shroud ability, will partially res up allies as well. This will make it easier for downed allies to get up and get back into the fight. A feature that makes this build unique is the Sandswell ability. This ability is similar to the Mesmer portals. Sandswell can be used in combat to teleport you and your allies behind an enemy Zerg so you can flank them. Also, the usage of this portal grants the user barrier and afflicts torment and cripple to nearby allies. A quick side note about this build, the armor uses apothecary stats. This is a very niche armor set and is usually not used in any other builds. I would only use this armor set if you are really dedicated to World vs World and plan to play this build a lot. What about free to play builds? Well, there is a shortage of that. However, I found a build that you can turn into a free to play build. The Support Scourge is fairly dependent on the Sandshade and the Scourge Elite specialization. However, I think you can do decent healing and support by switching the Scourge Elite specialization for the Soul Reaping trait line. Personally, I would use something like you see on screen now. There is also a condition roamer build available that uses the Core Necromancer specializations. The skills and traits don't require an expansion to play. This build is focused on solo play or playing in small groups. With a decent amount of CC and a number of boon ripping skills, you should be able to deal severe damage to your enemies and camps. Wheel of Doom and the Reaper's Mark staff skill will do a good amount of CC. Your Death Shroud ability can give you that extra bit of sustain that you will probably need to survive when taking damage. You can quickly generate life force by using your staff skills, but you can also generate quick life force by using the Corrupt Boon skill and then use the Feast of Corruption skill. Feast of Corruption will deal more damage and generate more life force for each condition your enemy has. This skill will also strip additional boons from your enemies. This skill is the core of the build since it can completely lock down enemies by ripping their boons constantly. This build recommends to use Trailblazer armor, which is only acquirable through the Heart of Thorns expansion. However, I think you can play this build by using armor with Dire or Rabbit stats. Well, I think that wraps up the World vs. World segment. If I missed anything, make sure to leave it in the comments. Also, don't forget to provide a build and equipment template if you'd like to share your build with the rest. Alright, let's move on to our final segment, player versus player, which we will abbreviate to PvP. I did a good amount of PvP on my Necromancer, one build in particular, which we will start with. It's actually an odd one because I'm certain I found this build somewhere on the internet, but I can't find it anywhere. I recently tried it, but it still works extremely well. This Scourge build focuses on dealing damage while also supporting your downed allies to quickly get back up. It's a bit of a mix of the support builds and the condition-based builds we have discussed before. This build uses a staff and a scepter and torch to deal damage. Once again, this build uses a single Sandshade because of the Sand 7 trait. The support abilities of the Blood Magic trait line further enhance the functionalities of the Sandshade skills. The skills I use are the Sandflare skill to heal myself, give myself barrier, and to strip boons from enemies. Blood's power is used to grant might to myself and allies, and also bleed my foes. Epidemic is a strong skill that allows me to spread conditions from one enemy to other enemies. And next to that, I use Signet of the Undead to increase my life force generation. You can also use this skill to revive downed allies, but I rarely use it for that purpose. Sometimes I switch this out for Trail of Anguish to break stuns and grant myself mobility in some occasions. The elite skill is the Flesh Golem because of the blood trait Vampiric. It grants me health every time my golem strikes a foe. And next to that, the golem is also used to CC a number of enemies with its charge. This build works best if you are fighting for a capture point with your team. It is also effective in 1 vs 1 scenarios, but I personally feel it shines in team fights. Let's move on to the last build, a Necromancer build that is meta right now and requires no expansion. Get ready for this one, free-to-play players. This build is also a build that revolves around applying conditions to enemies. However, this build also has skills to remove conditions from the Necromancer itself. Using the Consume Conditions healing skill, you will gain more health the more conditions you have on you. It will also remove these conditions. Also, the Spectral Walk skill will give you swiftness and consume conditions you have on yourself. These conditions will be consumed into life force. This comes in real handy if you want to enter Death Shroud and you are getting low on health. The Fleshworm skill might be odd at first. You just summon the thing and it just sits there and shoots your enemies. However, if you use a skill again once you've summoned it, you will destroy the Fleshworm, teleport to its location and apply poison to enemies that were nearby the Fleshworm's location. Plague Lance is your bread and butter, apply conditions to everyone around you, elite skill. The most interesting condition that this build applies is Fear. Although it might not sound interesting at first, the condition is buffed by the traits that this build uses. Of course, Fear is used to CC your enemies, but it is also further buffed by the Fear of Death and the Terror trait. Terror makes the Fear condition do damage over time. So if you use Fear to CC an enemy, that enemy will also take damage over time. And the Fear of Death trait will then further increase the duration of the Fear condition. To make Fear even stronger, the Soul Marks trait will make your marks unblockable. So if you use Staff skill 5, Reaper's Mark, you can apply Fear to a group of enemies that cannot be blocked. This Fear is increased in duration and will damage over time. An extremely strong combination if you ask me. Give this build a shot and tell me what you think of it. And that concludes my list of Necromancer builds. This took quite a while to make. So if you like this video and want to see similar videos in the future, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also make sure to like and share this video with your guildies. And please share your favorite Necromancer build in the comments and let me know what video you would like to see next. For now, I would like to thank you all so much for watching and I hope to see you all in the next one. Peace!